Hello, everyone. This is Claudiu Murgan, the host of the Spiritual Inspire Show. And my guest today is Zach Leary. Zach is a podcaster, writer, cognitive dissident, yogi, and futurist. Growing up in Beverly Hills in the 80s, he came to realize that the man who often took him to school in the morning and tossed the ball in the backyard with him was not only one of the instigators of the counterculture movement in the 60s, but also had a front row seat for some of the most important cultural movements of the late 20th century. And I'm referring to Timothy Leary. This led Zach to create a path for himself that was full of trials and tribulations, but resulted in many different incarnations, ranging from digital marketing ace for Apple, U2, and Coldplay, to psychedelic integration specialist. Currently, Zach is the host of both the It's All Happening with Zach Leary podcast and the Maps podcast. They help they have helped to cement him as one of the most thought-provoking podcasters in the cultural philosophy genre of podcasting. Zach, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's quite an honor to have you and sharing with us some of your life experiences. I will start by asking you how important Ram Dass was in your life, and how we know how influential was he was in the 60s. So can you expand on his influence in your life?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And thank you for asking the question. I would say, and not to be overly dramatic, but Ram Dass was probably the most important person in my life. In some ways, even more so than my dad, because when I was 22, when my dad died, and that was a while ago now, and all the great, the big questions that you wish that you asked your father, they only kind of occurred to me a little bit late. I was, about 18, 19, 20 when I started to realize, oh my gosh, now is the time to be asking. And then he died when I was 22, and Ram Dass had always played a role in my life since I was a little kid. And he would always appear and kind of have this presence around our house and this friendship with my dad. And, and I recognized this light within him from a very early age. But it really started when I was about a teenager. When I was a teenager and I started to read Be Here Now. And, my earliest recollections of Ram Dass were I was so intimidated. I couldn't believe I had never met anyone who shined like that. That look of love, that look of contentness, that look of pure compassion, mixed with his humanity. He was a very human guy who shared his, all his difficulties as well. But so my first recollections of him were very intimidating. I felt very uncomfortable around someone who could shine like that. But later on, as I grew older and started, I got into, I guess, the Eastern spiritual path through yoga, through exercise yoga, and that in turn led me to meditation and to more formal practices of cultivating spiritual awareness and love and kindness practices, bhakti yoga, and kind of specific lineages within Eastern philosophies. But Ram Dass always, he became more and more important the older I got, and I consider him probably my most influential teacher, personally, not just because of who he was, but also because he was around. He was in the body. He was available, and he was so generous with his time and affection and love towards me. And I miss him terribly.
So it was that 18, 19-year-old time frame when you decided to look for a spiritual path and go deeper into life meaning and purpose?
Yeah, I'd say it was about then. I mean, that's when the spark was lit. I don't think I wouldn't really say that I started following a formal practice until my late 20s, but it was around 17, 18, 19 when the seed was planted, and I knew that as much as I revere and love my father. Um, his, his path was one of the mind. He was an intellect first and foremost, and that's a great thing. But I just felt called for perhaps something that was a little bit more, uh, a little softer, I guess, not as cerebral. But yeah, it was around that age where the seed got planted, and then over the course of the next 10 years is when I really started to develop a practice of my own.
Yeah, so somehow Ram Dass starting on the path of more intangible aspects of our lives, which
Yeah.
your father didn't have that same attraction to. But he had the capacity, intellectual capacity to, hold that type of discussions with Ram Dass.
Absolutely, and I really this kind of is making me think of the great Ram Dass story of right before he went to India in 1967 for the first time, like for the few months prior to that, when he was still living at Millbrook in upstate New York, he was living in the gatehouse at Millbrook and taking LSD, I think, every few days, really trying to kind of, unwrap that puzzle and becoming increasingly frustrated with the process of going up and coming down and going up and coming down, and knowing that as powerful and important as the psychedelic method is, there is that problem of coming down, and how to alleviate that, how to find a little bit more equanimity in your life, and having that sort of blueprint, sort of that open-ended question when going to India. I think I resonate with that a lot, because that was really I'm speaking past tense. I think that still is my problem, or still is my goal, is to find equanimity, to find a little bit more consistency in life, rather than sailing on the extreme winds of success and struggles
Yeah.
and yeah.
And I think this is the kind of the path of a yogi, that you, at least spiritually and emotionally, you follow a pretty much flat line instead of going up and down, as you said, with the crowd or with the news or with
Yes.
anything else surrounding you. You keep that constant attitude of, yes, you are aware of what's going on around you, but
Yeah.
that will not influence of who you are, and stay still pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And if you look at all the great Eastern traditions, the Buddha talks about the middle path, and the early chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna talks to Arjuna about
Yeah.
not being too tired, or or too awake, or too hungry, or too full. It's always like finding the middle sort of a path, and the whole kind of Leela outside of the Bhagavad Gita between Krishna and Radha is about togetherness, separation, and that within that there is a little push and pull that stays in the middle lane.
Yeah. Did you ever follow Ram Dass to India? Travel with him?
No, that was before my time.
Hmm.
That was before my time. Yeah,
So,
sadly, I've been
yeah.
to India many times, but never with him. Hmm.
And you encounter a lot of phenomenal people while your father was alive. Did you meet the McKenna brothers?
Yeah, I did. I mean, Terrence, he was also pretty young when I died, but I remember Terrence fondly, and being mystified by his voice, his hypnotic
Hmm.
abilities to really bridge the gap between mysticism and intellectualism. I mean, I think Terence was the best at that, and Dennis today is still carrying the torch very well. Dennis is great.
Yeah, Dennis was a guest on my show as well, early guests. So Terence also was a believer in psychedelics being a healer,
Yeah.
healing, our dramas, our dragons, demons, whatever. Um, do you think why your father didn't think that psychedelics could be a healer? Or maybe I have the wrong impression, but this is what I think.
Um, well, I'm not sure if I would. I mean, we could be just splitting hairs in terms of semantics here, because uh, Timothy never talked about healing. That was not really the paradigm that he was interested in, which says a lot. And you could probably unravel the whole pathology of Timothy Leary's brain. But he wasn't really a healer or interested in healing. He was more interested in discovery.
Mm-hmm.
And awareness, and finding out what it is that makes the human experience what it is, and learning, as he said in many phases throughout his life, learning how to operate your brain. And those words are very deliberate, learning how to operate your brain. And later on, he juxtaposed like operating systems, metaphors against that. And early on, I mean, he saw it just as almost like a psycho-spiritual, mechanical operation. So healing really wasn't, I never really heard him talk too much about healing. So I don't know if it would be safe to say that he wasn't interested in psychedelics as a healing method or mechanism. I just don't think healing was really at the forefront of his consciousness.
Interesting. In my opinion, religion somehow, especially lately, divide people, and spirituality brings them together. Why do you think people are afraid to step outside the religion they were born into?
Well, that's really the question of the ages, isn't it? It's funny that you asked that, because right now I'm reading a book on the Crusades. I've never really decided to formally study the Crusades until it was just my birthday. Someone got me a book for my birthday on it. And I mean, that question has been posed for, 1,500 years now, about why feudalism and imperialistic views of religion become sort of like the forces that bind and the forces that dictate. Um, I think, cultural traditions, um, the way that the way that tribes and nation states and identity are formed around religious doctrines and traditions, they're so closely aligned, they're so closely binded, that at this point, one could even argue that it's we've been doing it so long that perhaps it's even genetic, that tribal imperialism has just become hard coded into the human experience. And while there are not, crusades in the dramatic, sense of hordes of armies on horses and foot, traversing the land and raping and pillaging at the behest of the Pope, I still think we have, more subtle crusades and more subtle sort of dogmatic absolutes. I think religion, when it's most misunderstood, is that it's a path of absolutism, as opposed to a path of spiritual interpretation. And I'm sure you would agree, when absolutism gets mixed into that is when things get tricky.
Yeah, and I think we still go by social limitations and what people think about us, and we don't have that courage to, be ourselves and expose or present what we think, because people will lash at us. So that's, I think, another fear we have for staying
Yeah.
small and not going outside and expressing ourselves.
No, and you make a good point, and that really makes me think of at one point when is it that you become aware of that? I think like children born into whatever culture they're born into, do you think that they think that,
No?
or is it something that's learned?
Yes. It's learned
So
from
where do we break
parents.
the
Yeah.
cycle?
Yeah, it's a very sensitive subject. And
Yeah.
what was your most profound psychedelic experience? Was with ayahuasca, psilocybin, San Pedro?
Um, I'd say, um, well, as far as pure psychedelics go, LSD and DMT,
Mm-hmm.
and then depends how you look at it. MDMA. I mean, MDMA, I guess, is technically an empathogen, but it also fits within the psychedelic community. But all three of those have had. I couldn't isolate any single one trip other than to say that the three of those have equally contributed to being very profound and important milestones that help shape my identity, all for different reasons, of course. I mean, the epiphany, or whatever you want to call it, liberation, awareness that DMT provides is a very different one than MDMA provides, but equally important.
Yeah. What does it take to be a psychedelic integration specialist?
It takes a lot of experience having done it yourself, first. And second, I think it takes a sensitivity to understanding what the real paradigm, or sorry, not what, where the real paradigm shift occurs within the psychedelic experience. In my opinion, the experience itself isn't the real work. It's what you do after it. The experience itself is and whatever, a 4 to 6 to 7 hour journey, whatever substance you're taking, is an incredible, life-changing experience that shows you, different, you know, different shifts within, different ways to operate within your own consciousness, within your own ecosystem that's within you. It's like being inside of the matrix. You are able to see things and experience and reinterpret your emotional intelligence in ways that you were not able to do prior. And that's a great thing. It's a great experience. And, within those few hours, you're able to confront, um, you know, past traumas, future fears or successes, or, love, or whatever it is that you're looking for. But when it's over, it's over. And so learning what to do with it afterwards is really the most important part for me. I always take issue when you hear a lot of people have a profound experience in psychedelics, and perhaps they said something during the experience, and then when it's done, they said, "Oh gosh, well, that was just the drugs talking." And that's just not true. It's not true. The drugs created a temporary paradigm shift within your subconscious that allowed whatever it is, whatever was stuck, to be unstuck, even though that was temporary. So when you come down, the integration model is about adapting that experience for the rest of your life so it can become meaningful on a long-term basis. Yeah.
So do you have multiple reintegration sessions with individuals, or one session is enough? Do you have let's say, a template you work with?
I do have a template that I work with. It's subjective, though, in that it's not a one size fits all approach to the individual, depending on what it is the individual went through or what they were trying to address through the psychedelic experience. For instance, if your intention going into the psychedelic experience is to increase spiritual awareness, say get closer to God, that's a very different intention than healing past traumas. Those are two very different lifeboats,
Yeah.
and that's the integration model. The template is sort of like adjusted for each. I mean, I recommend 3 integration sessions, and then on your own, developing a daily practice for 10 days after the psychedelic journey. A 10-day practice that includes a morning meditation, morning journaling, that some specific questions are provided, but that sort of helps develop the muscle memory that was shifted during the psychedelic experience. Yeah.
And if one is lucky enough, he will experience the ego's death during these type of ceremonies. How do you integrate that? Because that's pretty
Maybe.
transformative.
Yeah, no, it is. And that's a good question. And we were talking about Terence McKenna earlier, and I still think Terence was the best. He was the best at articulating that, of articulating what it meant to have, of the importance behind having ego death, and knowing that. And one of my favorite Terence McKenna quotes is, "There's a place beyond language. It's just so damn hard to talk about." And there is that place beyond language that occurs during ego death, especially with like tryptamines, with DMT, 5-MeO, high doses of ayahuasca. And the experience, as far as I can tell, is that when you completely cease to identify with your ego, when the entire building blocks that make up Claudiu or Zach, completely shatter and disintegrate and become one, the experience of that is that, you are face to face, you are head on with the great existential questions of our time. And then when you get put back together again, I think it provides a very different relationship with the world around you. Not to say that, getting up and taking out the trash or doing the dishes isn't important. Those things are important because it's how we live, but they become rightly sized. It makes all of your personal melodramas a little bit less self-important. You can see it in the greater scheme of things. The things that generally, I think the things that human beings struggle with on a day-to-day basis become our own personal melodramas. They become our own stories, that we love to hang on to our own stories. And as Krishna Das says, we star, write, produce, and direct the movie of us all the time. It's a constant flood of the movie of us. And, even though the ego death within the psychedelic experience is temporary, it's incredibly potent and powerful to see, the movie of you shatter. And I think it creates a relationship with the outside world that is will forever be different.
Yes,
And I highly recommend it to those that are feeling that they are the right candidate for it. I'm not an advocate of indiscriminate psychedelic use at all. I think it takes a very special and sound and strong, human psyche to be able to navigate those realms. And it's not for me to say if you fit that trajectory, but if you feel that you do, by all means.
yeah. Do you organize your own retreats in South America?
Well, I don't do retreats. I do one-on-one sessions. Yeah, I don't do retreats for a variety of reasons, but yeah.
So
one-on-one.
people will go, they have their own psychedelic experience, and then they will contact you for help, pretty much.
Yeah, they can do that. And now and then I do guided journeys as well, if people want to um, discuss that. It's certainly it's something I do now and then, not that often, but I do it. And you're free to pass out my email on this podcast if they want to talk more. I don't talk about the specifics too much because we're still living in the world that we're living in, and it's the way it goes.
I understand. Yes. I read about one of your father's concepts about the transhumanist concept of space migration.
Yeah.
What do you think it will take for humanity to be ready for a major space migration?
Well, I don't know, Claudio. I think the answer to that seems to be changing every few years because, right now we're dealing with a situation in America that is seems light years away from being able to embrace concepts like that. I mean, the most Trump talks about space is creating a space force. He talks about militarizing space. Um, and of course, there are a lot of, more practical hurdles that, Elon Musk and team haven't even figured out yet. The effects of zero gravity on the body, the radiation exposure from long trips to distant planets. Um, so I think what it takes is, for us to regain that willingness and that excitement to be explorers once again. I think we've kind of lost that a little bit, and we left the cave, we traversed the fields, we crossed the oceans, we've built skyscrapers, and we've flown planes, and it's time for us to keep going.
Yeah, but we'll have to change our mentality and the way we see ourselves and the world around us in order not to
We
make
sure
the same
do.
mistakes.
Yeah, we sure do. And I mean, the current state of affairs is not very promising.
Yeah. You play kirtan. Why did you
I
choose
do.
this instrument?
I play kirtan because I've always been a musician. Um, I went to music school for my college, and when I started kind of getting on the bhakti yoga path, I just thought it was so great that you could sing your prayers. And it just became such a beautiful exercise, a beautiful practice. I just immediately resonated with it. Initially through the Hare Krishna movement, which was one of my earliest exposures to Bhakti Yoga. I immediately resonated with the Hare Krishna tradition of singing and dancing as kind of a way of worshiping the divine. I thought it was just a really beautiful and exciting and high energy practice. And yeah, when I started formalizing my practice, I just immediately started gravitating towards the harmonium and incorporating that into my daily practice. Yeah, it was really just, I mean, my reason for doing so actually wasn't all that exciting. I'm not the most disciplined person in the world. And I just thought that like singing my prayers was something I could do. It sounds pretty easy. I could do that. Um, and that's still the reason I do it. I sing my prayers every morning because it's fun and it really does bring me closer to what I'm looking for. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't checked. Are there any YouTube videos with you of you playing kirtan?
Yeah. Yeah. There's some on
Okay,
YouTube.
I'll
Yeah.
check them out.
I haven't formally recorded an album yet because I've never taken it. I never thought of myself as, a professional kirtan wala. That's not something I ever aspired to do. I do it really just for myself. But yes, there are some videos on YouTube, and some ones that I'm okay with.
Have you ever participated into a Kumbamela gathering?
I have. I've been to the Kumbamela once.
Wow.
Went to the last Maha Kumbamela, the big one, and wow, it's big.
I think the next one is in 2025 or something like that, and we'll see if they will allow them to gather so many, like 100 million people or something like that.
Something like that. I just wow. I mean, I've never. I mean, it's just this organic kind of blob of amorphous city just contracting and expanding and yeah, it was something else.
Yeah, how
I
do you
mean, what I
survive
really
something like that? Yeah.
well, you have to have a good camp to stay in, for one, and it's difficult for Westerners. Um, Fortunately, I had a good camp invitation, which and for people who go to Burning Man, you know what I mean. It's sort of
Hmm.
like that. There are different camps that are organized, but it's amazing to see those traditions, the ancient traditions like the Naga Babas and and those guys that are alive and well, in the thousands and the tens of thousands, and who knows where they come from. I have no idea, but somehow every 8 years they emerge and make themselves known, and it's an amazing thing to witness. I highly recommend it if you have a sense of adventure. If you like peace and quiet and cleanliness, it is not for you.
I know, I know. So, what is your daily practice?
My daily practice is, well, um, I get up and I stretch and move my body a little bit for about 10 minutes, and then I sit down and I sing the Hanuman Chalisa. I sing it one or two times, depending on how I'm feeling. And then when that's done, I do about 10 to 15 minutes of silent meditation, a little breath work, and then I read a page from a sacred text, and that's about it. Yeah, I mean, I think the whole thing takes about 25-30 minutes, depending on my mood.
Hmm.
But the
So,
main thing, the main
yeah,
part though that I find is really important, which I especially these days, in the world that we live in, is start your daily practice before looking at a screen, before turning on your phone, before looking at your email. Um, don't look at a screen. I think it's made such an important difference in my life to be able to um, to be able to I'm a technologist. I'm an early adopter. I have no issues with technology, but it's really helped me to quiet my brain to do my practice first before any screen time.
yeah. I mean, I put my phone on an iPad on airplane mode at 9:30 p.m. and I won't touch them until 8 a.m. after I do my meditation, and and they stay on a different floor anyway, so no one can reach out
Oh,
to
there you
them.
go. Yeah.
What is your concept of God?
Oh, wow, that's a complicated question, um, because I certainly have no absolute answer, Claudio. I mean, my uh, concept with God is evolving all time. I mean, my relationship with God is very different than it was 10 years ago. I'd say I'm probably a God version 7.0 or something, 7.5. Um, I think I, it, all I know is that consciousness, as we perceive it, as we experience it, is a disembodied experiential plane. I don't believe that consciousness lives within each one of us. I believe that we have access to a universal plane of consciousness. We have an antenna that allows us to tap into that. So you can ask yourself, does consciousness exist after we die? Yes, it does. It's disembodied. And our experience within dancing within that disembodied plane gives us personality, gives us ego, gives us uniqueness. And that infinite wisdom, that infinite plane of knowledge, that infinite plane of love, understanding, compassion, that also has its shadow side of chaos and darkness and strife. I think that's what God is. And there have been many ways to explain, to define that infinite knowing, that infinite plane of consciousness, that infinite plane of wisdom and love. And we've given it many faces. We've called it Krishna, we've called it Jesus Christ, we've called it,
Babaji, Buddha, yeah.
Babaji, Buddha. There are many, many, many faces.
Yes.
But I think every experience, every definition does share a lot of similarities, and that the concept of God is this pervading plane of beauty and wisdom. And I think of it as it's just pure consciousness.
Yes, I agree. And also for me, that concept has evolved throughout time. I want to bring forth information which was explained or published by Greg Braden and Barbara Marciniak, where they say that 200, maybe 300,000 years ago, we were created on this earth. We're just placed on this earth. Because if you go by the Bible, you were created in the image of God. God, if it's universal, God is all around us, doesn't take a specific form, takes any form around us, then there is someone else who created us, who looked like us and created us in his own image. And at his own term, he was created by someone else. So it's a very interesting game and idea to play with. But the more I think about it, could it be truthful? I mean, yes, we have the consciousness, we have everything around us imbued with specific intelligence and energy, because it's not me telling my stomach to process the food or to equalize the body temperature. Is that innate intelligence who's doing that? So do you think that there is any truth in this idea that we are placed on this earth 200, 300,000 years ago by someone else who created us genetically and made us and who we are today?
Well, I don't know. I love the way that you articulated that, Claudio. I do. And I believe it's a possibility. I don't believe in absolutes. I believe it's as good as an explanation as anything. I do.
Okay.
But have you looked into any Graham Hancock stuff?
Yes.
Do you know about? Yeah, Graham Hancock is now convinced that there were there were archaic civilizations that were intelligent life designs that were they were so small that they were completely wiped out, and we have no archaeological proof of them, but that there are proofs of like ice ages existing and tectonic plate shifts in places that we didn't think otherwise existed. And I think he's onto something there, which completely shifts the timeline considerably. So I don't think we really know, but yeah, and that your explanation leads me to the question: well, if that's the case, did we invent God or did God invent us?
I think in my opinion, we invented God because we saw something unexplainable happening around us, coming from the sky or you know, in any circumstance. And we created that type of divinity. We had to find an explanation. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, we gave it a name. Could have had any other name, but I think, in my opinion, we created that concept, and we lived by since then. That's the and it's different than the God from the Bible, and there are different aspects of this entity we call God.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I tend to agree.
you mentioned that the title of your podcast, "It's All Happening," came to you in a dream. How much your dreams are creating your day-to-day life?
Well, uh, when I remember them, I think a great deal. Um, I think a great deal, and certainly lucid dream states that are accessible for me, through meditation and sound baths and things like that are incredibly important um, for how I interact with my interpersonal relationships. If somebody or someone appears to me in a dream, and I have enough foresight or aftersight rather, to remember it and write it down, it's an incredibly powerful tool um, for asking myself why they appeared in such an exaggerated, dramatic form within that dream, and what it is that I have to look at in my daily life, in my interpersonal relationships, and how I could help heal them and become more present within them. So, yeah, I mean, my dreams are incredibly important. Um, that said, I think the vast majority of my dreams are incredibly surreal and psychedelic and non-attainable. But the ones that are, I take note of.
Yeah, I think it's important to be aware of our dreams. And I sleep with a notepad
Oh,
by
good.
my bed, and just to remember stuff, write it down right away.
Yeah.
What other projects are you working on these days?
I'm um, I'm working on two things primarily right now. I'm working on a book about psychedelic integration called "And Now the Work Begins: A Manual for Psychedelic Integration," and I'm working on producing and writing the official Timothy Leary documentary.
Oh, interesting. And when
Yeah.
is that due?
To be determined. To be determined. We have an amazing team with producers and writers, a couple of Oscar winners, and really an amazing team. Um, and we are just kind of putting the final touches on finding a home for it. So to be determined, but within the next year and a half.
Hmm. Okay, good luck with that. That will be interesting.
Thank you.
And if the travel will allow you next year, what interesting sites are you going to visit?
Oh boy. Oh, yeah, me and my partner we're just talking about that. We're both really can't wait to travel again. I mean, America has built a wall around itself, um, which is completely wild and insane. I would like to finally get to Morocco and Egypt and Northern Africa, the two places I've never been, and see my friends in Europe, which have it's been far too long.
Yeah, interesting. Zach, thank you very
Yeah.
much for your time today. It's been a pleasure,
Thank you.
and
Thank you for having me.
good luck with your projects. And for
Thank you so
my
much.
sorry, yeah, and for my viewers, please share this video, connect to my Patreon account, and subscribe. I provide exclusive content. And until next time, love and gratitude.